Shortness of breath, fatigue, hair loss. Some people dealing with these symptoms for months after having COVID-19. Medical experts haven't figured out yet why long haulers are experiencing these chronic symptoms, but the National Institutes of Health is studying them to find out. Here's NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk.
Hey there, Allison. These so-called long haulers have only been identified very recently. The virus really hasn't been around that long. What's striking is how little we know about it. And when researchers at the NIH realized what was going on, they went to Congress, launching this billion-dollar study to try to understand why some people can get rid of COVID, but not the symptoms. Imagine having a fever for nearly a year.
Starts out in the 99 range in the morning and escalates throughout the day to the 101 range.
After getting sick with COVID-19 last March, 47-year-old Amy Watson is technically virus-free, but she is still suffering symptoms. She says she coined the phrase long haulers.
On April 29th, I created Long Haul COVID Fighters. I named it after a trucker cap that I wore to my drive-up COVID test.
The name stuck, and the support group she started just keeps growing.
It's taking a long time for the medical community to catch up to where we are. And we are suffering, and we need help.
The NIH wants to change that, launching a billion-dollar initiative to study long haulers.
Respiratory viruses, like a cold if it's minor, or the flu if it's not so minor, people tend to get better after a couple of weeks. And with COVID, for a lot of people, that doesn't seem to be happening.
The brain fog just won't go away.
Body aches, tired, can't think straight. My chest hurts.
Feels off, like I'm searching for words.
NIH Director Dr. Francis Collins says there is no pattern to who gets hit with long COVID. Young, old, some really sick with COVID at first, while others weren't sick at all.
We know there are people that have had these lasting effects for months. Do you suspect it could be longer than that, years even?
I fear that some people who have had these effects who are already 3 or 4 months out may not be on a path to get better in a few more months, and this could be something that becomes a chronic illness.
While there are still many questions, medical professionals say there are theories about the cause. One is that the immune system clears the virus, but just keeps on fighting as if it's there. NIH neurologist Dr. Avindra Nath showed us what that can do to the brain.
So those little marks right there that are on that slide, they shouldn't be there?
They shouldn't be there. All this green stuff should not be there.
You said earlier they're leaking?
The damage of the blood vessels allows the leakage of this protein into the brain itself.
I'm not a neurologist, but leaking in the brain is not a good thing, right?
Not a good sign, unfortunately.
The brains he is studying are from people who died suddenly from COVID, but didn't have serious symptoms. Dr. Nath says this brain damage may not be severe enough to kill someone, but could be the cause of some of the long hauler symptoms. Amy Watson, who is still unable to return to her teaching job in Portland, will soon be taking part in the NIH study.
I'll be able to access treatment that will help lessen my symptoms and make me feel normal again. I just want to get back to my life.
A lot of the long haulers that we spoke to told us that one of the problems they've had, one of the challenges, is trying to convince the people around them that what they're going through is actually connected to COVID. And before this NIH study even really gets off the ground, what it does for them is provide a kind of validation while also promising to look for a way to help them. Allison?
Two drug makers joining forces to get more vaccines out to Americans. Merck will help produce Johnson & Johnson's COVID shot as part of a deal brokered by the Biden administration. Let's bring in NBC News medical contributor and former Obama White House health policy director, Dr. Kavita Patel. Dr. Patel, it's always great to see you, especially on a day with news like this. So we know Merck tried to develop its own vaccine, but scrapped the drug after it got some unsuccessful trial results. How significant is this new partnership with Johnson & Johnson? I'm not a medical expert, but it sounds like a big deal to me.
Yeah, Allison, it's great news in what I think has been important, great news just with the authorization of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine over the weekend itself. Here's what it really means. Number one, it was the result of the Biden administration using the Defense Production Act to really scour the country, look for manufacturers that had the capacity to help build more vaccines, simply put. And its second significance has to do with what's very true. Merck is a rival to Johnson & Johnson in a number of ways. So this is unusual for kind of competitors to be this cooperative. And then number three, good news, Allison, it means we're going to get more vaccines. Not right away, because you can't just make it. It's not like, me running to a printer and just copying a piece of paper, but we will get more vaccines to Americans as a result of this, probably after 2 months at least.
Sounds like a pretty big net positive. Glad to hear that. Let's talk about variants. People with COVID-19 immunity are still getting infected, we understand, with the Brazil P1 variant, according to some early research. Now, these are studies that have not yet been published in scientific journals, but how concerned are you that new variants could derail our progress in the fight against COVID?
Yeah, Allison. And just briefly, that research you mentioned came out of Brazil, where they found as many as 25% to 61% of infections were probably reinfections due to this variant. And that's very alarming. And it tells us that, as you're asking, the variants concern us. The P1, which emanated from Brazil, really concerns me, because it kind of is telling us that our immune system might not protect us from another infection if we see that variant. The good news is that all of these vaccines that we've been talking about that are authorized have some effectiveness against these variants. So it's important to get those shots in arms quickly. But I really do think, Allison, this means that we are not going to have just one set of COVID vaccines. Looking at these variants, it points to the fact that we're probably going to need at least a yearly, if not seasonal, COVID vaccine.
In Colorado, more than 800 people, Dr. Patel, were reinfected with COVID-19, according to state health officials. So what do we know about possible reinfections here in the U.S., whether this has to do with variants, how common this is? Do we have much information here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So look, first of all, we now have had a year of people plus with COVID. So a lot of these infections that they're seeing in Colorado are actually what we would call second infections, Allison. Think of it as you getting the cold twice in 1 year. It's not from that same first kind of virus or reaction, but a whole new virus that kind of infected you, giving you the same symptoms. So if it's been more than 90 days, what we think was the immunity from that first infection has not been long enough to protect you from getting a second infection. To your point, though, they're looking to see if people have been reinfected by doing genetic sampling of the actual virus that they were infected with. And in many cases, they're finding it's still rare to be truly reinfected. But when they do, it is from these variants, and it is concerning. So bottom line, we need to probably make sure that people who had infections way early in the year, in March, they really do what it's their turn. Get vaccinated. Don't just think that because you had the infection, that your immunity lasts for very long.
Dr. Patel, enlarged lymph nodes could be a COVID vaccine side effect, and in some cases they could be mistaken for cancer, according to a New York Times report. What else can you tell our viewers about this, and what should they know, not just about this, but if there are any other new vaccine side effects that we're learning about as people start to get vaccinated in larger numbers?
Yeah, I think that I have a lot of patients who are women who are at the age where they need to get their mammograms. And a lymph node, just as a reminder, is kind of in parts of your body. It's in your neck area, in your armpits, and in your groin. And it's kind of where your body's immune system revs up to help fight. So lymph nodes can be enlarged when you have an infection. And we've noticed that after vaccines, the COVID-19 vaccine and other vaccines as well, Allison, that you can get sometimes some temporarily enlarged lymph nodes. When you go in for a mammogram or a CT scan, it can show up and be flagged by a radiologist as abnormal. So a little pro tip, get your mammograms, women, get your mammograms before you get your COVID vaccine, or at least when you get your COVID vaccine, space out your mammograms at least 6 weeks after the vaccination, both dose 1 or dose 2, if you're getting the 2 doses. And then what it tells us about other side effects, Allison, is that this wasn't something that was really researched in the study trials. So we're seeing effects like that. We're also seeing some cross-reactivity from the TB test. It tells us that anything that can make your immune system kind of respond, like a vaccine, could potentially be seen as another type of infection or response in your body. Bottom line, when you go to the doctor, make sure they know when you've been vaccinated or when you're planning to get vaccinated, so that we can time these things for you as a patient.
Dr. Patel, that is great advice. And I personally thank you as someone who is thinking, as soon as I get vaccinated, I'm going to run out and make all of those doctor's appointments that I've been putting off during COVID. So great advice to know about spacing those out. Really appreciate it. A last question for you. Texas Governor Abbott announcing today the state is fully reopening 100%. Ending its mask mandate, increasing capacity at all businesses and facilities. Your thoughts on that move right now?
Yeah, very disturbing. My heart's in Texas. My family's there, parents and siblings, and I grew up there. And I will tell you, Allison, this is not the time to do that. It's tempting. God knows I want 100% of our country to reopen. But we are right at that important fork in the road. What we're doing now will make a difference 4 to 6 weeks from now, so that, Allison, we can fully reopen sooner rather than later. I worry that 100% is just going to send an incredible opportunity, especially because most Texans have not been vaccinated yet. They're still in the less than 10% population. So my worry is that this will just give the variants a heyday to reproduce. And we could see a mini surge in the state of Texas and surrounding that because of people's travel.
Dr. Patel with Texas Roots, her mug gives her away. Thank you so much.